In the name of our loving and ever-present God. Amen. So, my brothers and sisters, welcome again to our kitchen table, to our time together. I've missed you. Listen, a sower came in here to sow. Some seeds fell on the ground, some on rocky paths, some among the thorns. Now, don't be sneaking looks around wherever you're sitting right now for those thorns. And others fell on good soil. The most obvious question seems to fall even as those seeds are falling, and that is, okay, which are you? Path, rocky ground, thorn bed, good soil? Then comes the lesser obvious question, okay, which am I? So what do we have here? I know, it's a parable. And what's it about? And what are we going to do with it? Well, for starters, let's think a moment about the sheer brilliance of Jesus in Matthew. You see, long before we had psychiatrists and psychologists and, heaven help us, pastoral counselors, long before we had spiritual advisors, long before we developed the relatively new concept of empathy, that's the ability to imagine and be sensitive to the feelings, the emotions of others, long before all that, we have the knowledge conveyed to us in Matthew of someone who offers to everyone a love that understands our thoughts and our experiences and our feelings even better, perhaps, than we ourselves can or do. Matthew and Luke tell us that when something over which we have no control assaults us or assails us or falls upon us or just happens to us, we have the power to respond out of our own determinations. We have agency. We have the power to choose how we will respond to whatever has just happened. We can, if we wish, turn the other cheek. We can, if we wish, love our enemies. We can do only those things to others that we would have done to us. We have the power, if we wish, to choose whether or not we will take the high road toward the shining city on the hill or the low road that takes us to wherever. We have the God-given right to choose whether or not we will love God with all our hearts and our neighbors as ourselves. We can choose. I can, and you can. This story comes to us in the Gospel of Matthew and Mark and Luke, by the way. In Matthew's Gospel, it falls after confrontations with the Pharisees and after the statement of new kindredship. After Matthew says that the realm of God is populated with disciples who form a new kind of kinship, deeper and richer and based on a faithful relationship with Jesus. In response to the news that his family is outside wishing to speak to him, Jesus replies, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" And pointing to his disciples, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother." Now, take a moment, if you wish, to consider all those around you, those near and far. Who among us now, in wherever is our place, are doing the will of God? And are you, or am I, within that particular family, the doers of the will of God family? You see, this gospel speaks to us both now of both now and of the end times in the creative order of God. The people hearing this gospel in the early days from the gospel writer Matthew, or even those hearing it even earlier in the words of Mark, will have recognized that the realm of God is present among them, and that the harvest is yet to come. They would have been standing with disciples who were living proof of the living God. These disciples who truly did the will of God. They were acknowledging the coming of the new order and the returning of the Holy One in due time. Eugene Boring, in the New Interpreter's Bible Commentary, tells us that sowing is preaching or teaching. Harvest is the ingathering, and judgment in the end times. This is language of now and of yet to come. Now, I'm inclined to add that the sowing is also the dispensation of the grace of God, and our harvest is the manner in which we choose. We choose to receive it and to live it out. So recently, I asked a colleague and friend, what if today I am the path where the seeds fall, where the evil one comes and snatches away what has been sown into my heart? What if tomorrow I'm the good soil? What about those occasions when my intentions are good and I start out right, only to fall away over time? What about when I find myself enmeshed and tangled with the daily grind, with the fears and anxieties of this day and age? Because here, my brothers and sisters, I think is the brilliance of the parable. Here is the ancient wisdom that derives from the presence and teachings and love and sacrifice of Jesus. It is that God knows we are on any given day, as likely as not, to be any one of the receptor options of the seeds of God, of the grace of God, of the lessons of our teacher, of the impouring of the ethical imperatives out of our Christian heritage. On any given day, under any set of life pressures or circumstances, we might respond to the message, the teachings of Jesus, in one of at least these four ways. And unless we are inhibited by circumstances such as intense grief or by some immediate threat, we get to choose. Unless we are frozen by circumstance, we get to choose. We have agency. We have the power to be the disciples we are called to be. We have the authority to accept or reject the teachings of our great teacher. Oh, and one more thing. What about all that seemingly profligate sowing? The sower is just tossing those seeds about with apparent disregard for where they might land. What is up with that? Especially given the sensibilities of the writers and the prophets of the Hebrew narratives. Wasting seed, you see, was sinful. Seed was presumably finite in quantity, and therefore to be used with appropriate consideration of its precious nature. And if that seed was human seed, then wasting it was considered an abomination. That's the language. I refer to Leviticus, of course, and elsewhere that Scripture asserts or makes the point, and not the point that many interpreters, I think you might say, are trying to make today about human sexuality. If we accept that the sower is God, then we ought to try to acknowledge some purpose in the profligate sowing of seed. And this is where I think of God's grace, freely and abundantly sown. Maybe the sower is tossing seed in my direction on those days when I am the pathway, the extraordinarily hard-headed and opinionated pathway, or when I'm strong in intentionality and weak in execution, or when I am desperately caught up in all these worldly matters. Thank God that on some of those days in these cycles of humanity, I am actually able to be receptive to the word and can actually contribute to the harvest. Can contribute to the harvest. This is the key, I believe, to the whole story here today. We are called upon to be hearers of the word, to assimilate the message, and to change the world by choice, on purpose. And we can change it 100-fold or 60-fold or 30-fold or 1.275-fold or whatever I have the strength, the wherewithal to change fold. These measures are illustrations of the object of the exercise. They are not intended to be the actual standards by which we will be judged in those end times. We should choose, I think, to be good soil. And we should choose, I believe, to do our best to change the world in whatever ways a harvest as each of us might yield provides. The seeds we nurture and sustain in this world may be proverbially wheat or barley or dandelions or oaks or whatever they may be. We are called to provide the good ground for whatever the seed we are given to nourish. The sowing is an act of God, and we must honor it as we are able. I believe seeds have been sown here too in each of you. I believe that our loving God is acting with all of us in our places, in our homes, where we work, in all of this sowing of seed. Where this sowing is an act of God, we ought to honor it as we are able. We ought choose to do our best to be the good earth onto which this seed will fall. If it is possible for good earth to be excited by the gift of the seed, we can be that. We can do what we are given to do. We can choose to receive, and gladly. Amen.